My guest today is going to hate what I'm about to say. I mean, I just know that because it seems overly fawning, but I think it's true. So stay with me on this. I didn't get to meet Mother Teresa in my lifetime, but I wish I had. And there are Mother Teresas walking amongst us every day, I think. I've read this guy's stream, and he quotes Fred Rogers in terms of watch for the helpers, right? Like in all things, watch for the helpers. This guest is a helper. And not only is he a helper and has always been a helper, but he's helped helpers. And that's the coolest thing of all. I am so excited to introduce to you Gary Bagley. He is the executive director of New York Cares. It is, I think, the single largest provider of volunteer-led social service in this country. It is the biggest affiliate of Points of Light, the George Bush Sr. program of volunteerism and giving back. And he was at the point of the spear when COVID-19 raised its ugly head in force in the United States, in New York City. I am so excited. There are people you meet along your journey and you just go, gosh, my daughter called them pocket people. You just want to pick them up and put them in your pocket and carry them with you always. Gary Bagley is my pocket person. Wow. So good to talk to you today. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. I'm still reeling from the Mother Teresa comparison.
I warned you. You might not like it, but you got to live with it, at least for this hour. How about that?
Well, there you go. But certainly something to aspire to.
Exactly.
I think we'll talk more about leadership, but I always think I see the distance between where I wish I were and where I am is one of the things that keeps me pushing forward. So I don't want to be Mother Teresa because I want to keep aiming for that.
Yeah, well, that's good. And I want to keep aiming for it too. I'm just a little farther behind. I'm working on it. I'm the catch up.
I'm not sure about that.
Let's talk about your journey. New York Cares, we want to get into it in big detail and what this last year and a half or so has meant for your organization and for your leadership. But right now, just tell us, how did you get involved in this nonprofit space? Why not be a true American and try to make a buck off of every piece of labor that you do?
Well, yeah, I have to admit, I found my way to nonprofit and without really knowing the nonprofit world existed per se. It's not the kind of thing you're taught in school as you're growing up. And when I first came to New York City, I'd come right out of school and I had majored actually in the arts then. I had done performing arts, music composition, been around theater. I started teaching, which is what I love to do. And the journey took me into classrooms all over New York City. The program I worked for, which is a great organization called Tada, that I'm still connected to, I'd find myself in 20 or 25 different schools all around the 5 boroughs. And there was a eye-opening for me that, as and this is so on our minds as a society right now, but it was my first hand view of the inequities in our society. I was raised to believe that every kid gets the same education. And in standing in classrooms all over the city, I saw no, not true, right? Every kid is not getting the same education. We don't all have access to what we need. Anyway, that led me to eventually lead the program at Tada, Director of Education. And that was my boot camp on being a nonprofit leader. And then I did discover that I have a great joy in enabling others to do the thing that I loved. I loved writing the grant proposals. I loved training new teaching artists. And eventually that led me, because I backed into the nonprofit space, and I'm a firm believer in education. So I backed up and did a master's in public administration to make sure that I really kind of expanded my toolkit as a leader. And then the job at New York Cares was this amazing moment, because I remember still looking at the job spec and going, you can make a living making sure other people volunteer. I had been so committed to volunteerism my whole life. And the fact that there was a standalone organization dedicated to service said, I got to go there. I started running the programming, which, by the way, we could talk later. I think program is the best boot camp for leadership in the nonprofit sector, because what we're marketing every day is what the organization does. So having both created and developed that was amazing. My predecessor, who I could rave for hours about, Ariel Zwang, moved on to her next position in life in very late 2008. I was just getting that leadership bug to say I love New York Cares, but as I always say, I really knew I wanted to lead, and so her position happened to open up. I didn't expect that. And as a wonderful leader, she had both been a mentor and a guide to me. Our board of directors knew me very well because she didn't cover up her senior team. She showed them off, which I always believe is an important lesson. So I found my way to New York Cares, and I've been in the leadership role now for 12 years. But we can talk more. A job that regenerates daily.
There's so much in that intro, in terms of your background. I'm just going to encourage you, those of you watching us on live stream on LinkedIn or Facebook or YouTube, to kind of chime in a little bit around how you volunteer, how your career has moved, and the give back that you have. But also, I think, who's given you that freedom to expose yourself to other leaders so that you aren't hidden behind a leader. And I've certainly have both kind of leaders in my career, right? Those leaders who you did the work and the credit never came and you were hidden under a bushel basket. And those leaders who every time you did the work, they were kind of spotlighting your work and giving you a chance to grow and present to boards and the like. So I think there's a lot to that, but I encourage you to share your comments in the comment section as we move on. So let me kind of pivot from there. So now 2008-ish, you're in New York Cares. Look out, be careful what you ask for, because there's a lot of responsibility to running an organization like yours. Maybe you can give us a little of the 2008 to pandemic sort of journey. I know a lot of what you were doing and building relationships and really giving back in lots of different ways in the community. But then we'll get to the, oh my gosh, there's this virus showing up in New York City at scale.
So 2008 is so interesting. I often joke that during my second interview for my current position, the Dow dropped 3%. And so thinking about taking on leadership was an ambition enough. Then really thinking about what does it mean in this particular moment in time, right? What does stability look like? So ironically, in the sector, and I think it's one of the biggest challenges for all nonprofits, but certainly was for us in 2008, is need greatly increases and revenue is generally very limited. So we went in, and I always believe you lead with mission. As long as it's humanly possible, you retain team, because if there's any hope for the brand to succeed, if there is any fundraising play, if you will, to be made, it's going to be in the work that you do. 2008 was amazing because we had a brand new president, Obama, who made a call to service. We had a mayor in New York City, Michael Bloomberg, who also made a call to service and institutionalized an area in New York City government called NYC Service, right, to really show that priority. So we both knew we were in the sweet spot of showing up. We have not seen orientation numbers like that, and that's the number of new volunteers who come to us until COVID. Right. Just our orientations were packed. Our projects were all full. So really at that point, I would say, like many leaders, I was saying, like, every part of the ship that's stable, keep it stable, take care of the team. Just like COVID-19, it was remembering for me every day that, listen, the people on the floor are doing this good work and worried about losing their own jobs, right? They're reading the newspapers, right? People are bringing more to work than just the work. And then, of course, COVID-19 has been that in a whole different way.
All right, so we're almost playing inside baseball, and we're way too close to what is New York Cares for people who have not heard of
Right.
it or who are not actively involved in
Right.
what goes on in the city. Tell me a little bit of for somebody who isn't oriented to what is New York Cares and what can they liken it to maybe in their own world.
Great. Thank you. Important that we get that in. New York Cares is New York City's largest network of volunteers. We were actually founded by a group of people who wanted to volunteer, and when they tried to, the barriers were too great. One was that finding good programming was impossible to access. The amount of time it might require was more time than people had with the kind of careers they had. And then on the other side, our schools, our homeless shelters, a lot of our nonprofits simply don't have the capacity to deal with the influx of the human capital, if you will, that shows up on its doors. So we were founded to get in the middle. I always say, if it's hard in terms of volunteering, that's what our staff does every day. Our job is to make that easier and to extend that promise to every New Yorker. So what that means now is, on an average month, if somebody signs up for New York Cares, there are about 1,200 to 1,600 projects every month in many different service areas, from education to hunger to visiting seniors and cleaning the parks. And then we make it easy. For the nonprofit, we talk more about management, but basically we provide them an on-site manager who is a volunteer, an unpaid volunteer, who agrees to lead a team of volunteers in whatever the service is that day. So I always say, like, hidden within our model is what I consider one of the better leadership development programs that the city has to offer. We have about 1,300 team leaders who are out in the trenches, organizing meals programs during COVID, reading programs, at elementary schools, and coordinating with a very experienced, very talented staff to do that.
Well, I remember the first time I sought to volunteer. I think I was I probably did a lot in my own local community when I was young, but when I was into a formal volunteer program, and they said, great, you have to commit for 6 months, you have to give 10 hours a week. I'm like, I just want to volunteer. I really don't want a job,
Exactly.
And it's interesting how that's evolved, right? This kind of shaping the opportunities around the availability of your time and resource. So you're not, if you want to commit to something long-term, you want to be trained in things, that's all out there. But there's this whole world of drop-in, just-in-time volunteerism going on.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I often say to folks, like, whether you want to make a one-time commitment or you want to show up to the school daily for the next year, we're here to make that an easier process, right? One example I often bring up is our college access program. Right? If you want to find a school in New York City where you're going to show up every Wednesday night, tutor somebody who's preparing for their college access tests of some kind, that's really hard to find. It's hard to find the school. It's hard to find the training. And so, we'll offer 30 to 40 training sessions so that it fits your schedule. So I always say, even if you want to be here every day of the week, there is a way to make that easier for you. I think, and we'll talk more about the current environment in a minute, I think we built a system that was easy for some, but not easy for everybody. And therefore, that's when I talk about extending the promise. I want it to be as easy, as I always say, for the parent or caregiver at PS 18 in the Bronx. I want that to be as easy as it is for the person who might be working at an investment bank in Manhattan, right? The goal is to get more people out.
You're almost like a broker, you're trying to find the person who wants to volunteer. You want to help all of these organizations that need support, and you're helping get them together based on their passions, their needs, and their time availability, the resources that they have or need. It really is, I think, more complicated than people realize to blend community need with community resource.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because I often, so many volunteers come to us, and there is a a certain element of, I had all this time to donate and nobody can figure out how to use it, right? And even with our founders who are wonderful and still engaged in the board, I think, and this is, I think an important thing for leaders to always do. I said, I want to reframe that. Let's flip it around. And you're a school teacher somewhere in New York City. Nice person shows up. They want to help. The way they want to help isn't something you feel like you actually need, or it might not be the most important thing. But you don't want to be mean and tell this person you don't want their help. But then what happens is we have a volunteer who does something that feels like it doesn't have an impact, a group that doesn't have the capacity to support you, and therefore everybody has a bad experience. So one of my old phrases I'm sure I beat to death is that volunteers are employees who get paid with something other than money.
Wow.
Right. Yeah. It is a contract, right? It's an agreement to serve. And then this gets to our sector, which tends to under-resource human resources, right? We don't take good care of our people, but then a third of our workforce are volunteers. So unless you really manage that system like you would manage, for me, I often say, yes, we have a full-time staff of 70. Actually, I'm going to call that 1,500 because these volunteer team leaders are staff, right? They represent us in the neighborhoods we serve. They are the face to other volunteers. We owe everybody development, structure, and management.
So I when I was younger, I did an internship in clinical psychology, which is my background. And my son later in life did an internship in his area of expertise, which was in sound engineering. And the difference between those two internships was marketable. I mean, I actually learned things. He was used as a servant, right? And I think that, volunteerism is a lot like internships, right? We expect that if we're going to give our discretionary effort, we're going to get a return on our investment. And that return is normally impact in volunteerism, maybe. And in internships, it might be a learning curve. So I think people miss that so often. I love the way you framed it. Let me bring in some other voices. If you'd like to join our conversation, just add a comment on LinkedIn, Facebook, or YouTube. And here comes one from Joe Ione, who says, Joseph and Gary, nice format. I would ask if New York Cares has collaboration with other states. So if people are not in New York, can they tie into a similar opportunity? So let's go right there, even though I was saving that pièce de résistance for later. But Joe is always ahead of the show. So there you go.
There you go. We do. New York Cares is part of an international network called Points of Light. If you go to pointsoflight.org, you can first find similar affiliates across the globe. And you can also find accesses. Not every area will have, there is a Chicago Cares, there is a Boston Cares, but not every metropolitan area or every area will have them. But then they also have a broader network of volunteer opportunities that you can find in your neighborhood.
All right. So there's the option for you, Joe, wherever you may find yourself. If, however, you are in New York, this would be the option for you. All right. So we kind of got into what does New York Cares do in terms of aligning it. We talked about, I think, what leaders need to do to make sure this is a positive experience in nonprofit, but how that's probably not all that different than what leaders need to do to make that happen in the for-profit space as well. I realized I was talking this whole time, not on camera, and you were so graciously, presenting yourself with attentiveness. So I thank you for that.
Right.
So we got into that, but I think this is we really need to call out specifically COVID-19 as a phenomena that increased human need, that increased the possibility that people would pull inside of themselves and said, it's all about me. I got to survive. To hell with the rest of civilization. As long as I get my shot first, as long as somebody else serves me, I am going to play it safe. And so many people were in need. So talk to me a little bit about the juxtaposition of people feeling comfortable giving when they didn't know if they were going to have employment, all of that. I mean, it was just a crazy time to be a leader in nonprofit? What was it really like?
It was crazy. You're right. And I would say New York City officially shut down on March 16th, a year ago, which is when our public school system closed. And within a week, there was a lockdown. One of the things that has consistently kept me optimistic about people is at the very moment when many of us might want to shut down, there are people who say, that's my moment. I need to be here even more. So in the first 4 weeks after the pandemic was officially kind of declared, if you will, on March 16th, we had over 10,000 people step up and say, I want to help in some way. And a big number of them, were willing to go in person. So, right from day one, we said, listen, you can't feed a person remotely. Like, it just can't happen. And we'd already seen, the unemployment numbers that hit like right out of the gate as business reacted. We went from a city with about 1 million people being food insecure up to being, I think it's 1.6 million now. So, so proud of the team, because they just got out there and they started calling soup kitchens and food pantries all in the highest need neighborhoods and saying, can we help? Because, by the way, 2 things actually rock the sector. And I like to talk about this because philanthropy does get involved in it. Is first, there were a bunch of folks who were over the age of 50, over the age of 65, and they really needed to stay home. So some of these organizations just lost their volunteer base one day, right? The second, which is really interesting, is corporate volunteers are a huge portion of the group that will work in the hunger space. A team from this bank takes Friday morning, and all of a sudden corporations shut down. So we have partners where we were there 1 day a week, like filling a hard shift for them, who are using us 7 days a week for the last year. I think, and this kind of harks back to 2008. So, in this moment, you go, the need is going this way. We're all scared about money, right? We are just terrified. My board was meeting weekly to say, like, how can we make sure New York Care steps up? Because this is a moment when we need to be here for the city, not pull back. How can we do that responsibly? How can we keep moving and running more programming? And so there was a good gap of about a month, I would say, where we were pushing out and trusting the work. And then the resource did follow, because as companies figured out we want to help, or individuals figured that out, we were there already showing up in a way that people could see. So really, really scary month there. I will say, so many debates about well-being, because, we have a staff that we said we're all going remote, right? And, I admit I struggled a lot with the dynamic of I'm going to sit in my apartment while other people are going out and serving. And found that through those stretching to kind of push through that question, we found our way to an ability to do more, because we agreed to not take the added burden on of staff of traveling to an office, doing things that would have been even more anxiety provoking than just living through the pandemic. So grateful we made that choice, but that one was a struggle for about a month.
And this tees up a comment that we just got in from Lisa Lemunion. So she was, I think this is in context to your point around a lot of volunteering comes in through the corporate supported volunteerism programs. And then that got pulled back in the pandemic. But there's still companies and organizations that aren't quite in the slipstream of volunteerism. And I think our question is, how do you encourage an employer to want to give back as part of the employee volunteering programs?
That is a terrific question. And, I often tell individuals to go at this from every angle you can think of. But so for many companies, an employee volunteer program is appropriately part of their CSR efforts. There might even be a corporate foundation, and you'll find a pretty robust support there. For other companies, it's more of a human resources function, right? They see the team-based volunteerism, the employees going to the soup kitchen or to the park or to a certain school, to also be an element of team leading. Or team building, rather. And then I would say finally, and this is decreasing, I think, and appropriately, is that there were companies who also looked at it primarily as brand building, right? We want to show that we're a part of New York City. Here's a picture of us all in the park, right? I think that people are aware, especially in the current environment, that a group of employees in T-shirts standing in a park is not necessarily that's clearly team building, but I think we all have a sense now of there being really more important work to do. I would also say just advocate. Many companies have employee philanthropy groups, and if leadership knows you want to give back, they do respond to employee desire. So just ask.
Lisa, I just want to apologize in advance. I'm sure you did not expect an actual answer to your question, one that was going to give you tactical strategies to solve a dilemma in your workplace. So forgive my guest for doing that. I think, and I'm so not proud that I'm willing to, if you just want to fake volunteerism, go ahead and fake it. Because I believe the intrinsic value of doing it exceeds your faking it, right? Like, so if you just want to do it for the photo op, I still believe the people who are authentically there making a difference can start the engine revved up. So anyway, but I much prefer organizations that come from a heartfelt place that says, I care so much about my team. I can't deny them the opportunity to have impact outside of the workplace. And I even think that by having impact outside of the workplace, they're more effective inside the workplace. All the research on cortisol levels and in giving and how that actually helps their overall health and well-being, all of that stuff is what I prefer to be the driver. But hey, I'm not proud. Just get out there and do something different.
Well, and I do think, and I would say we have this journey with many volunteers, many donors, where whatever motivation gets you started, to your point, Joseph, just get started. And, I always think it's a wonderful experience when somebody calls us and says, hey, our employees and we really enjoyed the event this year. We're looking for something maybe with what we think would have a deeper impact. What else do you have? Right. And by the way, the parks and gardens need volunteers. Right. So, we're here to make sure whatever work you do, it's going to serve the community. But hopefully, and this to your point, Joseph, it scratches an itch. Right. You start to go, oh, I feel like I made a difference today.
And be careful about that itch, because I think the more you do it, the more you want impact. Right. Like if I realize that my life is short, I realize that my resources are limited, as is my time. The more I do it, the more I seek a higher high, not in the intrinsic sense of high, but on the extrinsic impact of the high. And I want to tee it up because we were talking before this bit where I'm now in this kick with Darren Walker from the Ford Foundation, where I'm now no longer seeing giving philanthropy as the end all be all. In fact, I'm a little afraid that may be a bit self-serving, and that now I have to make decisions about injustice, right? Like I'm the guy who'd be glad to go out and volunteer, but if a homeless shelter were to try to move into my neighborhood, I'd probably be going, geez, really? Do I really I'll go out and volunteer, but really? I think it's a bbig itch, and once you start scratching it, you realize how big the need is.
Yeah, and I would agree 100%. And I would say, as we're dealing with that as a society, and then certainly within the sector, right? One of the things that we're really watching and very closely at New York Cares is I have my desire to help, right? And then I often talk about leadership. We have our espoused values, and then we have our values in practice, right? So what did I say I stand for? And then what did I actually do today? And of course, we want to bring those two as close together. So around questions of equity, around questions of poverty, I think we often at New York Cares say, listen, anybody with a heart cares about homelessness, right? The question is, how do you put your caring into action? The last year has taught us, me especially, that with that desire also comes some responsibility, right? We need to understand the issues where we're volunteering, right? I show up, I serve a meal today, right? The most volunteers will then, after a few sessions or a couple of months, whatever the time is for you, say, hey, how come the same people are coming here every week? How come nobody gets out of this soup kitchen line? Right. And that question should spark, I hope, some education, some willingness to cross that divide. And then I think, as you're saying, like, we each then come up against really sort of fundamental, almost existential questions of, if I say I believe this, am I willing to start working to correct the imbalance? It's one thing to feel like we're reaching across the divide. It's another to walk across it. And I would say every step you take, it will be a little harder, but you will be more grateful you did it.
And the cool part for me is, I think there was a time when I would read a book like Darren Walker's From Generosity to Justice, right? I would read a book in that space, and I would then become immobilized with white privilege, guilt issues, and like, oh, I'm completely confused now. Like, is this giving not worth anything? It really, it was so tortured. I can't even tell you. Now I think I've gotten to a point where I say, okay, I mean, this bar is constantly, this is a journey, and the bar is rising. And as I get the opportunity to hit the level of the bar, I have to reach for the next one. It's become easier for me to take that walk. What about you? Because look, in all due respect, if I can see clearly here, you're not a person of color running an organization where a lot of the needs state. I was just, I read something like Queens alone is 50% people from outside of the United States, right? Like,
absolutely,
they're all immigrants in Queens, 50%.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a different population than from whence you came.
Absolutely. I would say when I'm at my best, whatever that is, I'm listening, I'm not talking. And when I'm at my worst, I'm coming up with solutions from my own head, not really interacting with members of the community.
Hold on. We got to say that again. When I'm at my best, I'm listening. And when I'm at my worst, I'm coming up with solutions out of my own head and not listening to the community. Okay, now you can go on. I just had to make sure I highlighted and exclamation pointed that one.
I appreciate that, because when I talk about espoused leadership versus leadership in practice, there are a lot of times when I'm in the middle of talking and I think, oh, just shut up, Gary, like, ask somebody else a good question here. I think one of the things that I would also say on the journey is we need to listen, especially if you do not have the lived experience. You must commit to learning. Right. You must, whether it's workshops, whatever the books may be, that speak to the particular work you're doing, that has to be a constant part of the journey. And I think this is about overt leadership. I always tell the story that I was hiring our chief talent officer, who is just a gift in all regards, Naisha Holiday. You should look her up on LinkedIn. But when I was in my final round of interviews, and I can't remember, somebody gave me very good advice, but, we had done thought exercises, et cetera. And I thought, this is, to really lead, I need somebody who feels like they can be honest with me, right? And this dynamic, the racial dynamic that's here makes that hard, right? And it for both parties. And so anyway, in the last round, I said to all the candidates, I asked you 2 questions as part of the thought exercise. Did I ask you the right ones? And Naisha was the person who said no. And so I said, okay, that no. And I said, okay, that's who I need here. And by the way,
that's just mind blowing. I mean, it's one thing when just a minute ago, you said it's really important to ask questions, not do the talking. And even the questions sometimes need to be questioned. So go ahead.
Yeah, very fundamentally, and I think as an indication that she was the right person for New York Cares, she was testing me because she didn't want a boss to who she would be quote unquote checking the box and saying, "Hey, look, we're looking at diversity, equity, and inclusion." She needed to know that it was a genuine desire on the part of the organization and its leader, no matter where we were starting from. She was less concerned about like how advanced are we than I can make something happen here. So
I have a
I
friend
think
whose boss at the end of every meeting says, "Is there anything else I can do for you?" Which sounds so noble, right?
right,
Except when they ask that every time and nothing ever changes, right? Then the question is
right.
a pro forma sort of, well, now that we're coming to an end, I will appear interested in your state of being. But I think that's the fundamental difference, right? This is somebody who you asked.
Yeah.
She stood up, she tested you, and then the question is, are you going to change the question for relevance as part of your screening process?
Yeah, and that was remarkably helpful. And I would say, I think one place around all of this, and when you talk about privilege and guilt and leading as a white man in this particular space, is I think we're all so aware of all the issues, and there's an urgency to fixing things that we can't always live up to. And so I think if I struggle with anything, it's that I feel like I can't always move as fast as my team might need me to move on some of the issues we face. And a lot of that's about being a nonprofit. We have many stakeholders. We're resource constrained. And, I have, like anybody, I have that ideal world that I want for the organizational culture and for the city we love. And then I have the reality of resourcing it. So to me, that's like the single biggest kind of struggle within this kind of role.
All right, so let's talk about what got accomplished in COVID-19. And by the way, we're getting asked for some recommendations on books that people could read that would get them more understanding leadership in the nonprofit area, how to help organizations commit more to nonprofits. So if there's any reading that you'd recommend, I will note, because that is in the chat, that Gary was someone I reached out to in the context of Stronger Through Adversity. Your name came to me in a couple of different ways, Gary. There were several sources, one of which I think may be on your board, Keith Grossman, who is also in the book, from Time Magazine. He's the editor, or is he president, I think, of Time Magazine. He is a big fan of yours. And so Stronger Through Adversity, I was really conscious about making sure that the leader models that we used, didn't have politicians amongst them. Because I think there was such a self-serving element to many of those leaders that it colors the lens of leadership. And then I wanted to make sure that we didn't just have a bunch of for-profit leaders telling us how they created great, profitable organizations. That's super important to me. But I also want to balance it with nonprofits who are trying to create social good, social justice in the midst of the pandemic and racial injustice in our country. So I would hope that there's some threads, including Gary's insights in Stronger Through Adversity. But tell us about other books you would recommend to readers who are interested in learning more about having an impact through volunteerism or voluntary leadership. I know you did a chapter in a book. I think Volunteer Engagement in Management is that book title.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think there are a couple good handbooks on general nonprofit practice. One is the Josie Bass Handbook for Nonprofit Management. I use that when I teach. I do think those are important. And then I think there are a couple leadership blogs. I'm about to plug a woman named Joan Gary, GARRY, who has a great blog and leadership network for leading in the nonprofit sector, because it is totally different. If you're leading around DE&I think, everybody has their own journey on that. I found for myself that White Fragility was a real game changer in helping me understand just that topic of white fragility. And Ibram Kendi's work is just amazing. How to Be an Anti-Racist, all of his books. And there are many others that I would recommend.
And I was just going to throw, just because I've said it in the context of this meeting, Darren Walker's book, From Generosity to Justice, just something to consider in your reading as well.
Yeah.
All right. So can I pivot in the last few minutes before we,
sure.
I guess I should really be going right now to giving your sense of, A, what did you accomplish in COVID with your organization? And then B, what can people do to support you at New York Cares? So just go with that as our close.
We had great luck, and through a lot of hard work, we've delivered 36 million meals, made over 75,000 calls to isolated senior citizens, veterans, families living in transitional housing, and supported over 2,500 students through remote learning. So really deeply proud of that. We know we need to show up for the next 3 to 5 years for New York City. Those folks most affected by the pandemic, it will take the longest for them to get back. And as I always say, getting back to normal is not good enough, because normal wasn't good. We were already working to improve it. If you care about New York City, you can always volunteer or donate to New York Cares. We'd be eternally grateful. If you're outside New York City, of course, we would love it if you donate. We would also love it from a mission and a spiritual perspective if you give back in your own community.
All right, that's everything. Go to newyorkcares.org. Whether you care about New York per se or not, you care about humanity. There's very few organizations that deliver on that care for humanity like New York Cares does. We are not a neighborhood. We are a world. And so I'd strongly encourage you to have impact on that one. So let's go to my lightning round. Final. I warned you about this, though. I mean, I don't know.
You did. I'm scared.
How much I care about you that I actually warned you about the lightning round. So let's go to it. Here we are. Some just quick reactions to things that pop up. Let's go with this one. So are you a pumpkin pie or a pecan pie war winner? Where do you weigh in? Because this was your challenge, at least back in 2019 or 18 or something.
Right. I'm a pecan pie, unquestionably.
All right, that's the end of the show. No, let's keep going. So you hang with both sides. I mean, your celebrity photos really draw a lot of attention on Instagram. This guy was hanging out with you when he was vice president. I know I mean, you're with Garth Brooks. Your Instagram is like a who's who feed. But reaction.
First, that was a brilliant day. That was the 10th anniversary of 9/11. So it was a day of service. It was amazing. I never have gotten used. I want to be clear. I have never gotten used to meeting people like President Biden. I would love to say I'm smooth and I don't fumble, but I bet I do. But they all remember me. I swear.
Good. I'm sure they don't meet many people. That's all right. All right. How about that lady? Because she blows up your Instagram account whenever you pop her on. Like suddenly you become popular. Tell me about her.
That's my mom, who I lost just about 10 years ago now, and that is me. And I'm guessing that would have been an Easter Sunday as I was growing up. But my mom and dad both just had such a community spirit. And when I grew up in it, I wasn't aware of it until I was elsewhere and saw that it wasn't there. So, my biggest fan, and certainly I imagine I'm her biggest fan, although I have siblings fighting for that honor, and my dad.
Yeah, I got your dad there. He's a strapping young man. And
yes,
I know you were. I saw a birthday celebrated up through last year. Is he still with us? Is he well?
Yeah.
Okay.
Dad turned 87 on February 24th, and he is still kicking up there in Albany, outside Albany, New York, where I was raised. And, I actually quarantined a little extra, if you will, during COVID, because I wanted to be able to prioritize chances to still visit with him. So I locked down a little extra hard because he's a great guy. And you could see, I mean, like a Navy vet from the Korean War, and just really, always the highest of standards, and then the strongest support. So just a great guy.
All right, just some quick ones here to end. Seems like you really like spending time on a bike, or at least you like the impression of having a bike helmet on.
I do. I really ride a bike under that helmet. It is my therapy. I get out on the bike. I feel good. I'm riding along the coast of New York City. I'm riding in upstate New York, and that's one of those. As long as I can do it. When the world reopens, I've always wanted to bike around Vietnam. So, like I said, as long as the legs will keep moving, that's my joy.
I think the longer you keep moving them, the more they keep moving. So here are quick last ones, really quick. Bernadette and Fritz. Bernadette and Fritz.
Two wonderful dogs, one 16, one 5, both closed in the bedroom so I could do this.
They're really angry at me right now. Bernadette and Fritz are not fans of me.
They're
last but not least, David Lees.
Yes, David Lees is my husband. We got married 2 years ago. We've been together 11 years, and just a great guy that met through friends. It brings a huge amount of joy.
Today? I thought that was that's so 70s-ish of you.
I know.
That's everything we have time for today. Let me make sure, above all else, that I pop up the way that you can make a contribution to NewYorkCares.org. This is truly one of the most blessed leaders we have out there in the social space. Please support their efforts. You're not supporting him individually. You're supporting all kinds of volunteers who are making a difference in the world. You're giving them the way to have the maximum impact. You're giving nonprofits a way to get their programs supported, vetted, educated, all that stuff. It's just really a remarkable program. So thank you again for being a part of it. Feel free to drop off while I do my 1-minute close, Gary, if you'd like. Otherwise, let me just tell you all that next week, Samantha Burns from South Africa had such a good experience when I was down in South Africa. Talk about poverty, it's just amazing things that I saw while I was in South Africa. Wealth, poverty, and people who were doing some amazing things in customer experience. So Samantha Burns from Brilliant CX, she's going to join us from, I think she's in Cape Town these days. So we'll join her next week. Oops, I got both of those at 4:15. I got all these dates wrong. I don't know what's going on with me. Next week is 4:15. Next week is 4:08. So she's on at 4:08, 4:15. I don't know what day it is. Never mind. Next week is Samantha. The week after that is Micah Solomon. And then we have Chris Racinos on the week after that. So just put the dates in your own head, because obviously I'm of no value. Micah Solomon wrote the book, Ignore Your Customers, Ignore the Date, Ignore Your Customers. And then Chris Racinos is in the book, Driven to Delight. She's one of my favorite healthcare leaders. She is a nurse. She worked in a serious situation in terms of healthcare agencies in Los Angeles, frontline nurse in the COVID units. She's going to talk about resilience in nursing and beyond. So that's the show this week. I'm so grateful for you who tune in. And for those of you who comment, you really make this a lot easier, just having some comments that join along in the show. So I'm in your debt. Without further ado, think about NewYorkCares.org or Points of Light as you do your volunteerism. We'll see you next week.